He won't be beaten by police batons or by an uncompromising president who's now demonstrated violently his determination to cling to power. The centre of Belgrade once again echoed to the whistles and horns of opposition supporters. The president took their votes, they've taken the streets, unbowed by the behaviour of a police force now accused of acting as the presidential guard. There were some scuffles as the protests broke up, some minor stone throwing, some arrests, but nothing on the scale of what happened here last night. It began then with the crowds, as is their norm, adhering to the principles of non-violent demonstration. An array of students and Belgrade's middle classes demanding the rights to march and voice their dissent. But their president, Slobodan Milosevic, is a man whose hallmark is unprovoked violence. Opposition leader Vuk Draskovic negotiated with the police, but to no avail. And as the crowds grew larger, but still peaceful, the police suddenly moved in. They charged through the city, sending people scattering, batons flailing, tear gas and water cannon in support. These, the worst scenes of violence since March 1991, when Milosevic used tanks and soldiers to put down the opposition. Stones were hurled back in retaliation, but the well-protected riot squads continued their forceful dispersal. Foreign news teams were also attacked. Some 80 people were injured, a direct challenge to the West, which has warned the regime against using violence to put down peaceful protest. It's quiet here now after a relatively trouble-free day of protest, but this sudden spiral downwards into violent street disorder serves only to warn the opposition that theirs is a precedent with limited patience and that dissent of any form will no longer be tolerated.
South African police say they're following up strong leads in their hunt for the killers of Stuart Gaskell, who moved to Cape Town from Britain only last year. At the time of his murder, his wife had been about to tell him she was pregnant. Our Africa correspondent, Steve Scott, reports from Cape Town.
Killed in cold blood, overpowered at work by an armed gang, Stuart Gaskell was shot in the head at point-blank range. Yards away, bound and gagged, his wife Estelle. She'd come to take her husband to celebrate after finding out she was pregnant. Bundled in a truck with her, Stuart's mother. Both heard the gunshots that killed him. From his home in Burnley, Stuart's stepfather spoke of the family's grief and disbelief.
My wife's loss is tremendous, but Estelle's loss must be even more horrendous, because she's lost the husband and she's also lost the father to the unborn child.
Murder squad detectives say it's not clear why Stuart was murdered.
It was either done with malice or else there is a possibility that he could have recognized one of his attackers. There is obviously the possibility that they were scared he might identify them at a later stage.
Ironically, the headline in the local newspaper showing tourists have turned their backs on Cape Town over the summer season. One reason, the soaring crime statistics, highlighted last year by the birth of armed vigilante groups marching through the city's streets. The British business community here grows more concerned, but is prepared.
The fact is they have nothing to lose, so life being cheap, they won't think twice about shooting you.
South Africa's transformation from apartheid state to a new nation was always going to be an uneasy one. One of the most serious problems has been the level of violent crime here. This latest, highly publicised tragedy is yet another reminder that that obstacle stands as large as ever.
In the weeks since Israel handed over most of Hebron to the PLO, hardline Jewish settlers have continued to build or expand settlements in other parts of the West Bank. They've had the full support of the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu. ITN's Middle East correspondent Robert Moore examines the thinking behind the settlements and what they mean to the Palestinians.
Abu Asida is a Palestinian and a Bedouin, a man who for a lifetime has seen these hills as his Arab heritage. But his grazing land has now become a Jewish suburb. The Jewish settlers, appalled over the Israeli pullout from Hebron, are fighting back by rapidly expanding elsewhere in the West Bank. The Jahalin tribe are powerless, forced to watch from their tents as the Israeli housing goes up all around them. Mali Adumim is the biggest of all the Jewish settlements and is hungry for the land already lived on by the Bedouins. Having made his historic concession over Hebron, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu still projects himself as a close ally of the settlers, approving of their ideology, seeing them as Zionist pioneers. He is visibly proud of each settlement.
Look at it. Children, schools, swimming pools, houses, couples. People live here. They haven't lived here for thousands of years. Look at these hills. Are we depriving anyone of anything? Barren land. You know what? If we hadn't come here, it would have stayed barren for another 2,000 years.
For Abu Asida and many other Arabs, that is no more than arrogance and ignorance. They say it may be inconvenient for the Israeli government, but the land is already lived on, and it is far from barren. Just ask the Jahalin tribesmen, for in recent days their tin shacks have been bulldozed, their tents destroyed, their families evicted by Israeli police, all to make way for the expansion of Mali Adumim. The West Bank settlements remain the most explosive issue of all. Outraged human rights activists accuse Israel of nothing less than ethnic cleansing.
Everything that the Israelis are doing here is contrary to morality, international law, and decent behavior, without any doubt.
But the Jewish settlers say that living in any part of the West Bank is a right given to them by God. With such devotion, even personal tragedy is turned into hope. Yod Sur lost his wife and son during an ambush by Palestinian gunmen, and says the only true Zionist response is to keep building settlements at an ever faster rate. We're here on a mission from God, he declares. After 2,000 years in exile, we're back in our land. The Arabs must understand that. On just one point, both sides agree. With the building of every home, with the expansion of every settlement, the prospect of a Palestinian state being created on this land becomes ever more remote. For the Israeli right wing, that is a matter of joy, but for the Palestinians, it is a prescription for war. The West may be relieved that the Hebron deal revived the peace process, but here on the West Bank, the eviction of the Bedouins symbolizes the continuing conflict. It points at the huge problems that lie ahead in the next stage of the peace process, reaching a final settlement over land and borders.
Football